Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, May 29, 2024. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris campaigned for re-election in Philadelphia with a particular appeal to African-American voters. The jury in the Donald Trump hush money trial in New York City finishes its first day of deliberations. No verdict yet. We'll hear from analyst Larry Sabato about the potential effect of both a Trump hush money trial verdict and the Hunter Biden gun-related charges trial that starts next week on the race for president. Congressman Tony Gonzales of Texas narrowly wins a Republican primary against YouTube star Brandon Herrera, known online as the AK guy, who attacked the congressman for voting for a gun safety bill after the Uvalde school shooting. That school is in this district. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, makes another trip to Israel, telling the Prime Minister that Israel will never have to worry about support from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Moldova, which borders Ukraine, meeting with Moldova's president and announcing more U.S. aid to counter Russian disinformation. U.S. House Judiciary Subcommittee holds a field hearing on border security in Grand Forks, North Dakota, not far from the U.S.-Canadian border. And an announcement from First Lady Jill Biden and the Smithsonian Institution Secretary Lonnie Bunch that China will be sending new giant pandas to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. We'll talk about it with Axios reporter Mimi Montgomery. WPVI-TV reports that President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris will be in Philadelphia on Wednesday to launch a nationwide effort to mobilize black voters during a campaign rally. This as the race to the White House is heating up, with both Biden and Harris already having made multiple trips to Pennsylvania this year. Now Biden and Harris are stepping up their re-election pitch to black voters, a key part of their 2020 winning coalition that has shown signs of fraying. They'll launch a new black voter outreach effort during the visit to the battleground state. Two will stop at Girard College, an independent boarding school in Philadelphia with a predominantly black student body, and visit a small business to speak to members of the Black Chamber of Commerce. That was from WPVI-TV. At the college, the vice president introduced the president.
You know, Donald Trump once asked black Americans, I'm going to quote, excuse the language, "What the hell do you have to lose from a Trump presidency?" And sadly, we all know too well, when he was president, Donald Trump tried over and over to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and to take health care then from millions of black Americans. Year after year, he proposed cuts to Social Security and Medicare so that so many of our seniors would be deprived on what they rely on to live with dignity. And then he handpicked 3 members of the United States Supreme Court, the court of Thurgood, with the intention that they would overturn Roe v. Wade, and as he intended, they did. And today, 1 in 3 women and more than half of black women of reproductive age live in a state with an abortion ban, a Trump abortion ban. And if he wins a second term, I promise you he's going to go even further. So all of this is to say, who sits in the White House matters. It matters. It matters for the people of America and for people around the world. As Vice President, I've now met with over 150 world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and kings. And I cannot tell you how many times one of those leaders has pulled me aside and talked about how much the world relies on us and on Joe Biden's leadership. His defense of democracy, his commitment to the ideals of freedom and liberty and equality, and his willingness to fight for these ideals. And as the people of Pennsylvania know, our president does not only know how to fight, he knows how to win. We beat Donald Trump once, and we're going to beat him again.
Vice President Kamala Harris at Girard College in Philadelphia introducing President Joe Biden, who also focused his remarks on African-American voters, both his record and the record of his opponent in the presidential election this year.
The threat that Trump poses is greater in his second term than his first. It's clear that when he lost in 2020, something literally snapped in the sky. No, I'm serious. That's why January 6th happened, when he unleashed an insurrection. Now he's running again, and he's clearly unhinged. He calls insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol patriots. Patriots. If reelected, he wants to pardon, quote, every one of them. Let me ask you, what do you think he would have done on January 6th if black Americans had stormed it? Think about this. What do you think would have happened if black Americans had stormed the Capitol? I don't think he'd be talking about pardons. It's the same guy who wanted to tear gas you as you peacefully protested George Floyd's murder. The same guy who still calls the Central Park Five guilty, even though they were exonerated. He's that landlord who denies housing applications because of the color of your skin. He's that guy who won't say Black Lives Matter and invokes neo-Nazi Third Reich terms. We all remember Trump is the same guy who unleashed birthism, the birthism lie against Barack. And then Trump tells you he's the greatest president. I love this one. He says he's the greatest president for black people in the history of America, including more than Abraham Lincoln. I mean, can you fathom that? Where in the hell? Like I said, I think he injected too much of that bleach in his. I think it affected his brain. Some lies are so foolish they don't have to say anything about them at all. Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. You got it, kid. You got it. I'm showing you who I am, and Trump has shown you who he is. And today, Donald Trump is pandering and peddling lies and stereotypes for your vote so he can win for himself, not for you. Well, Donald Trump will have a message for you. Not in our house and not in our watch.
President Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee this year, at Girard College in Philadelphia, campaigning with Vice President Kamala Harris. CBS News article on the visit has this. According to the Pew Research Center, 92% of black voters went for Mr. Biden in 2020 compared to 8% of those who voted for Trump. In a March CBS poll in Georgia, 82% of black voters said they'd vote for Mr. Biden compared to 88% in a 2020 exit poll. In an April CBS poll in Michigan, Mr. Biden got support from 77% of black voters, with other third-party options on the ballot. That from CBS News. Former President Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee this year, was in New York City today as a jury began deliberating in his criminal trial. Donald Trump is facing felony charges related to the alleged cover-up of a hush money payment to an adult film actress who, ahead of the 2016 presidential election, threatened to go public with a sexual encounter she says she had with him. He denies it. Outside the courtroom, Donald Trump spoke about the case and this year's presidential election.
This is all because of Joe Biden and I don't even think it's him. I don't think he's smart enough to think about it. But it's the people that surround him in the office. They're smart. They're fascists, they're communists, but they're smart. And they're ruining our country. But we're going to win this election. November 5th is going to be the most important day in the history of our country. We're going to take back our country from these fascists and these thugs that are destroying us with inflation and with everything they do, how stupid they are, allowing 15, 16, 17 million people into our country, totally unvetted, totally unchecked. We're going to bring back our nation November 5th. Remember, most important day in the history of our country. In the meantime, this trial is rigged. Thank you.
Former President Donald Trump in New York City outside the courtroom where the hush money criminal trial is taking place. The judge read the jury their instructions today and then sent them into the jury room to begin deliberations. They did so for just over 4 hours before being dismissed for the day, and they'll be back on Thursday to continue. C-SPAN spoke this morning with Larry Sabato, founder and director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia and founder and editor-in-chief of Sabato's Crystal Ball, about the impact on the presidential election of both the Donald Trump hush money trial and the start next week of the trial of Hunter Biden, son of President Joe Biden, who was charged with lying about his use of illegal drugs when he bought a handgun in 2018 and then illegally possessing that weapon for 11 days. Here is Larry Sabato.
We're expecting to get a verdict possibly this week. Really, the trial itself hasn't changed polls and opinions. Do you think a verdict would? And what kind of information would come out that hasn't already come out that might sway voters?
Well, you're going to have competing reactions. Democrats, assuming it's a guilty verdict or even a hung jury, Democrats will be outraged and will denounce Donald Trump and will say this is just a taste of what would have happened had we had 3 or 4 trials before Election Day, particularly the January 6th one, maybe the classified documents too. And they will use that information all the way to November. And it may cut, a guilty verdict, I think, would cut a point or two off Trump. If he's found innocent, which I think is the least likely, but you can't eliminate it, least likely outcome, then that would pump Trump up. Now, hung jury, I could imagine the Trump campaign and Trump supporters seeing that as a victory, given that the trial is being held in heavily Democratic Manhattan. But I will predict one thing to you, and I may be dead wrong. I hope you won't re-show this if it's wrong. But maybe in a month and a half, 2 months, I'll bet you that most of the effect, maybe all of the effect from the trial, whether it pushes Trump up or pushes Trump down, disappears. And the reason I say that is because that's been the norm for Donald Trump, and especially in our highly partisan era, where Democrats stay with Democrats and Republicans stay with Republicans, and the relative handful of real independents, not the 44% Gallup tells us, because being an independent is a social plus. I'm independent. I'm not going to be pushed into a corner by any of those party leaders. But the truth is they almost always vote for one party or the other. So they're hidden partisans. There really are only 4 to 6% of the people I think are movable. Now, there's a larger percentage movable in terms of voting. Are they going to vote or not? And if they vote, are they going to vote for one of the 2 major party candidates, or are they going to vote for one of the independents or third party candidates? These are big questions. And again, nobody can have the answer to this. I hear people saying, oh, RFK is going to hurt this one. RFK is going to hurt that one. They don't have a clue about who RFK will hurt in the end if he hurts either one of them.
Well, Larry, there is another trial set to begin, and that is Hunter Biden's federal firearms charges. That's set to begin Monday. What do you think about that and any impact to the Biden campaign?
Well, what it will do is stir Republicans. They're the ones who are really focused on Hunter Biden, and they're going to be outraged by whatever it is uncovered in the trial. And if he's found guilty, they'll have, material to use for the campaign. If he's found innocent, they'll talk about it's a fix by the Biden administration. The Justice Department did this, for which there's absolutely no evidence, but nonetheless, that's what will be said about it. So it will stir the Republican base. It will probably increase at least a little bit Republican outrage, maybe a lot actually, and so that will be a plus for Trump and therefore a minus for Biden. Is that going to dominate the headlines? I think it'll be one of the headline stories, but last I checked, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are the 2 major candidates running for president. Hunter Biden isn't in it. The children of Donald Trump aren't in it. They're bit players compared to the 2 major party nominees. Let me add one other point, and Mimi, you've been around long enough to see this. Every president, and I even remember Eisenhower. I was born under Truman. every one of them has had a relative or 2 or 10 who were problematic and who got into legal trouble or whatever it may be. And I can't remember one of those relatives who actually cost the incumbent president much, maybe temporarily a few points in polls. But in an election, no. That's an issue way down the list compared to the ones that I discussed at the very beginning of this broadcast.
Larry Sabato, founder and director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia, and founder and editor-in-chief of Sabato's Crystal Ball on C-SPAN's Washington Journal morning program. You can find the full segment with him at our video library, cspan.org. Story from CBS News: responding to calls from congressional Democrats, Justice Samuel Alito is flatly rejecting calls to recuse himself in 2 cases before the Supreme Court involving Donald Trump because of 2 flags that flew outside his home. In letters Wednesday to House and Senate Democrats, Alito said he had nothing to do with the flying of the flags and that nothing about the incidents merited recusal under the Code of Conduct. In addition, he says neither he nor his wife knew of the meanings that are now being ascribed to the flags. He wrote in the letters to Democrats in part, "My wife and I own our Virginia home jointly. She therefore has the legal right to use the property as she sees fit, and there were no additional steps that I could have taken to have the flags taken down more promptly." That was from CBS News. KSAT-TV San Antonio writes that U.S. Congressman Tony Gonzales declared victory in the Republican primary runoff to represent the 23rd Congressional District on Tuesday, narrowly beating back a spirited challenge from YouTuber Brandon Herrera, who strived to turn the race into a referendum over the voting record on guns. Gonzales said on social media Tuesday night, "The future of America remains as bright as ever. Thank you, Texas 23rd, for continuing to place your faith in me." Article goes on, despite his massive fundraising operation and powerful allies, Gonzales' victory was exceedingly tight. With all precincts reporting, Gonzales led by about 400 votes. The difference is within the margin where Herrera could request a recount. The result was the culmination of months of feuding between the centrist Gonzales and the right wing of the Republican Party, which spilled out into the open in the months ahead of the election, despite pleas from leadership and the rank and file to keep the fighting behind closed doors. That was from KSAT-TV San Antonio. Congressman Tony Gonzales held an online news conference today.
I'm just so grateful for everyone that helped throughout this process. First off, I'm grateful to the folks that came out and voted. And I know while 30,000 is a low number for a runoff, I believe it was the highest vote pool or amount casted in the state of Texas. And I can't stress that enough. For everyone who came out and voted, thank you. Whether you voted for me or whether you voted against me, doesn't matter. You know, it's my job to represent everybody, and I look forward to continuing to do that. But it's important for us to get our voices heard, and your voice was heard last night. I'm grateful for all the people that just worked their guts out. We have built a machine. We have built a political machine to withstand every possible incoming you can imagine. But I look at this victory, and it's about being humble, and it's about getting stronger, and it's about finding out, listening to folks, meeting with more people, and you're going to see, how do I go hand in hand and try to find ways to make sure that everybody is on the same page. You're never going to please everyone. As a retired Navy Master Chief, I know firsthand you're never going to please everyone, and nor should you try to please everyone. Just do the best job you possibly can, show up in good times and in not so good times, and ultimately deliver. And that is what our campaign has done. It is delivered over and over and over again. And from the policy side, we've delivered, but from the political side, we've delivered as well. We have gone to bat. It wasn't just words. It wasn't just TV. I mean, it was literally ground to ground, block by block, kind of a knife fight. And I knew exactly that's what it was going to take, because my first election was a runoff. And that's just the level it takes.
Congressman Tony Gonzales, a virtual news conference after his narrow victory on Tuesday in the Republican primary for re-election. He was first elected in 2020. Some of the House Republican colleagues endorsing his opponent included Matt Gaetz of Florida and Chip Roy of Texas. Matt Gaetz posting on X Tuesday night, Team Gonzales spent around $9 million. Team Herrera spent around $1 million, 429 votes, referencing the margin of victory. This is Washington Today. From CNN, Israel will never have to worry about support from America. U.S. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina assured Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Tel Aviv on Wednesday. The U.S. lawmaker vowed to help Israel to hold the International Criminal Court to account following its move to seek an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. He also ridiculed the ICJ, International Court of Justice, who last week ordered Israel to halt its ground offensive in Rafah, describing the UN's top court as a joke. United States support for Israel has come under scrutiny again in the wake of Sunday's airstrike in Rafah, which killed at least 45 people residing in a camp for displaced people. Some of the reporting from CNN. Senator Lindsey Graham is on his fifth visit to Israel since the October 7th deadly attack on Israel by Hamas, which then has been followed by Israel's military response in Gaza. And while in Israel, Senator Graham was interviewed at the Jerusalem TV studio of Israel National News.
My message here to Israel is I just don't say I have your back. I want to have policies that will have your back. I want to sanction the ICC because we're next. I want to attack the International Court of Justice as being a kangaroo court. I want to give you the weapons you need. I want to go all in and making sure that nobody will screw with you in the future.
Without telling Israel what to do, because throughout administrations, the U.S. has been telling Israel what to do, where to build even a balcony in Judea and Samaria, for example.
My goal is to be an ally and let you make the decisions that will determine your future. The one thing I can say about the Jewish people, never again is now, as Bibi says, you don't need any more critics. You've got all the critics you need. You need a friend. And I'll tell you quietly as a friend what I think. But I'm not going to go out on the world stage and tell you what to do and how to do it because you're under siege. Everybody around you wants to kill you and your family. Now's the time for me and people in America to circle the wagons, have your back. This war means a lot to me. I'm looking for a peaceful outcome over the arc of time. The Palestinian people have been under the thumb of oppression and corruption. Maybe they can have a better future one day. I hope so for them. Bottom line is, until peace comes, I will be in your camp.
And is the support bipartisan?
I'm worried about it. Republicans are good, but there's an erosion in America. There is a fatigue with the Mideast in America. So I worry about the radicalization of the Democratic Party. I worry about isolationism in the Republican Party. But let me say, when it comes to Israel, it seems to be the one thing we as Republicans agree upon. But it's not enough to have the Republican Party. I want America in your camp. I want to wake America up to the idea that the threats you face, the people chant, death to Israel, also chant death to America. This is a time for us to understand, as Americans, you need friends all over the world. We have no better friend than Israel. The idea of Fortress America will not work. This outpost called Israel that practices democracy, that provides us with intelligence to keep us safe, it is in our vital national security interest that the Jewish state survive.
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, interviewed on Israeli TV, recorded in Jerusalem. From the Times of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces is now in control of 75% of the Philadelphia route, a buffer zone between Gaza and Egypt. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's national security advisor says inside Gaza, the IDF is now in control of 75% of the route, and I believe it will be in control of it all with time. Together with the Egyptians, we must ensure weapons smuggling is prevented from Egypt into Gaza, he tells the public broadcaster. He adds that he expects fighting in Gaza to continue throughout 2024 at least. That from the Times of Israel. These and other developments in the war were raised during an online audio news conference today held by John Kirby, White House Strategic Communications Advisor. Questions coming from Associated Press White House reporter Zeke Miller.
Something you might be able to address something today out of the East. First, word that Israel's military saying it seized control of that Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt. Is that consistent with what the Israelis have briefed you all on about their planning? And is that consistent with the limited ground operation that you've been talking about? Separately, the Israeli National Security Advisor said the war will at least last through the end of the year. Is that acceptable to the United States? And then lastly, do you have any updates or any additional briefings from the Israelis to the U.S. government about the specific munition used or the potential cause of that potential secondary explosion from that strike on Sunday that killed the civilians in Rafah? Thank you.
Okay, well, there's an awful lot there. I can't, as you know, I won't, Zeke. I'm not going to talk about IDF operations in any kind of detail. They should detail what they're doing on the ground. We're not there. It's not our op. That said, as I said yesterday, when they briefed us on their plans for Rafah, it did include moving along that corridor and out of the city proper to put pressure on Hamas in the city. So I can't confirm whether they've seized the corridor or not, but I can tell you that their movements along the corridor did not come as a surprise to us and was in keeping with what we understood their plan to be to go after Hamas in a targeted, limited way, not a concentrated way. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's our understanding. On the defense minister's comments about the war lasting until the end of the year, again, we'll let Israeli officials speak for themselves and for their assessments. It's a war they're fighting. I can tell you that President Biden is committed to seeing that we find a way to end this conflict and to end it as soon as practicable. We've got hostages that are still in the hands of Hamas and potentially other groups under horrific circumstances. We got to get them home. And we want to get them home in a deal tied to a ceasefire that we believe, if put in place, could lead to something more sustainable and a potential end of the conflict. And that's where President Biden's head is, trying to get this hostage deal done. And as you know, or I think you know, another proposal now is on the table, a fresh one. And we are doing everything we can to see if we can't get that advanced, because it could lead to the ceasefire in a temporary way that could also lead to something more sustained. So again, I'll let the defense minister speak for his own views and opinions. Our view and our opinion is we got to get this hostage deal now. The time is now to do it, to get that temporary ceasefire and to end this conflict as soon as possible. On your third set of questions, we do not have any more granularity today than we did yesterday about what caused the explosion and fire that killed those innocent Palestinians in the tent compound. We have been in touch with our Israeli counterparts again overnight and today, and we're trying to get as much information as we can, but I couldn't tell you honestly that we have clarity on that particular issue. As you know, they're investigating. And on the specific weapon, again, I'm going to be dramatically disappointing to you, Zeke, and to everybody else. We're not going to speak to individual payload loadouts on individual Israeli aircraft. The IDF should speak to their conduct of this particular operation, and that would include, we would expect in their investigation, include a discussion of what was used. Now, they've already said publicly that they used precision-guided munitions. They said that those precision-guided munitions had a payload of about 37 pounds, 17 kilos, which is a pretty small payload to be using. And if it is true that that's what they used, as I said yesterday, that would certainly indicate a desire to be more deliberate and more precise in their targeting. But again, we need to let their investigation conclude.
John Kirby, White House Strategic Communications Advisor, during an online audio news conference today. Associated Press reports that Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, withdrew his ambassador to Israel on Wednesday after months of tensions between the two countries over the war in Gaza, the latest repercussion from a South American nation over Israel's military campaign in the Palestinian territory. Lula has been a frequent critic of Israel's offensive in Gaza, which he compared to the Holocaust earlier this year. That led Israel's foreign minister to summon the Brazilian ambassador to the National Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem for a public reprimand. That was Associated Press. Another AP article, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Wednesday pledged $135 million in aid to Moldova for energy security and to counter Russian disinformation as the Western-leaning nation struggles to blunt Moscow's push for influence that has been buoyed by recent successes in the war in neighboring Ukraine. Blinken held a joint news conference with the president of Moldova in that country's capital, Chisinau.
What's so powerful here is the deep and deep-rooted commitment to democracy and, again, to Moldovans deciding their own future. And this in the face of bullying from Russia, of interference, efforts to spread misinformation, disinformation, weaponizing corruption, manufacturing anti-government protests. Despite that, we've seen extraordinary resilience from Moldova's leadership and especially from its people. The United States and many of our partners and your partners have deployed sanctions against those who are seeking to undermine Moldova's democracy. And as important, we've also been working with many other countries to provide you the support that you need to continue to move the country forward. Just going back to February of 2022, following the Russian reinvasion of Ukraine, the United States has provided $774 million to strengthen Moldovan institutions, to build resilience, and to enable you to push back more effectively against destabilizing actions coming from Russia. I mentioned already disinformation. Some of the things that we've been working on together with you include training, providing analytical tools under a memorandum of understanding that we signed in October of last year. We're helping to harden Moldova against cyber attacks, supporting a cybersecurity academy to train a new generation of Moldovans in cybersecurity. I think that will be to the benefit of the government, but also the private sector, where the skills that they acquire will make them very attractive candidates for good jobs. And then, of course, strengthening, bolstering a free media, and helping to support your efforts to clean up the justice system. Today, I'm announcing that we'll be working with our Congress to provide an additional $50 million to further advance these efforts, from reforming the energy and agricultural sectors to pushing back further against disinformation. That, in turn, will bolster the ability of Moldovans to resist Russian interference, to hold free and fair elections, to continue down the path to the European Union and Western integration, to create more economic opportunity.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a joint news conference in the capital city of Moldova with that country's president. Russia has about 1,500 troops in Transnistria, a disputed territory of Moldova. Secretary Blinken is also visiting Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic, for a NATO foreign ministers meeting on this trip to Europe. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrates 45 years of covering Congress like no other. Since 1979, we've been your primary source for Capitol Hill, providing balanced, unfiltered coverage of government, taking you to where the policy's debated and decided, all with the support of America's cable companies. C-SPAN, 45 years and counting, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, and that's free. U.S. House and Senate are not in session in Washington for legislative business this week, but a number of committees and subcommittees are holding field hearings around the country. The House Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Integrity, Security, and Enforcement held a hearing in Grand Forks, North Dakota, titled The Biden Border Crisis, North Dakota Perspectives. North Dakota's sole U.S. House member, Republican Kelly Armstrong, while not a member of the subcommittee, was invited to sit in.
2 summers ago, I had the opportunity to meet with the Grand Forks County Sheriff, who is not a witness but is here today. And I asked him what his top 3 issues were. And he said, fentanyl, fentanyl, fentanyl. He gave me his top 3 issues. They were all the same thing. And you can't be farther away from the southern border than Grand Forks. We're 70 miles from the Canadian border. But in every single community across the state of North Dakota, somebody is dying from fentanyl poisoning. 100% of those fentanyl pills are made by the cartels in Mexico. 100%. We oftentimes get into this conversation about whether they're coming in by ports of entry, between ports of entry, U.S. citizens, non-U.S. citizens, all of those different issues. But we lose sight of the fact of the very simple fact that they're all made by the cartels and they're all in our communities. So I don't particularly care how they're getting here. I want it to stop. You're going to hear from 4 witnesses who have been dealing with these issues from a law enforcement standpoint. And with all due respect to my law enforcement witnesses, I think I'm really excited for Ms. Davis being here. Because what gets lost in this conversation is a community that shares a border with Canada, shares friends and family with Canada, has a tremendous amount of economic activity, whether it's at a retail store in the mall in Grand Forks, or it's trying to get a grain truck across, or maybe just going to your sister's kid's birthday party after 5 p.m. And we've introduced legislation to open revert the hours at our border crossings back to pre-COVID levels. But do you know how frustrated a farmer on the northern border is when they can't cross over after a certain period of time, and then they turn on the news and they see what's happening at Eagle Pass?
Congressman Kelly Armstrong, Republican from North Dakota, at a House Immigration Subcommittee hearing in Grand Forks, North Dakota today. The witnesses there included 2 county sheriffs, the executive director of a local chamber of commerce, he mentioned her, Rebecca Davis, and the state's attorney general, Drew Wrigley, a Republican, who also spoke about the negative effects of fentanyl trafficked up from Mexico into North Dakota, and he talked about security on the northern U.S. border.
Relative to the onslaught of illegals entering our country through the southwest border, the federal effort to stop them is abysmal by any fair assessment. At the very same time, it appears as though the Biden administration's permissiveness has signaled weakness at the northern border, resulting in a significant uptick in illegal activity here as well. And the statistics are alarming. I recently requested a briefing from my BCI personnel with relevant information on the topic. I point out to the committee that we have 18 ports of entry along the northern border. We have it's a 310-mile portion of America's northern border, and just 3 of those ports are open 24 hours a day. Travel across that border in our segment is robust due to commerce, due to tourism, due to families on both sides of the line. Troublingly, however, between fiscal year 2021, fiscal year 23 rather, border encounters for the North Dakota sector of the border have escalated in a dramatic rate, calling the integrity of the northern border into serious question. Border encounters include apprehensions of illegals attempting to cross the border, people deemed inadmissible by U.S. border security personnel, and expulsions. There were 548 such entries attempted and refused in fiscal year 2021. Then 2,100 in fiscal year 2022, and an explosive 4,444 in fiscal year 2023. Early indications are that for fiscal year 2024, we're going to continue that statistical climb. The fact that these numbers would be troubling enough when viewed even as an affront to our national sovereignty. However, when we consider the fact that it took just 19 terrorists to significantly hobble our nation in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, our respective states are faced with the stunning reality that our communities are in danger and must be alerted to the reality that significant number of our foreign adversaries have made their way into our midst, and they are undermining public safety and the long-term national security of the United States.
North Dakota Attorney General Drew Wrigley, a Republican, testifying before a U.S. House Judiciary Subcommittee field hearing in Grand Forks, North Dakota. C-SPAN has the full video at cspan.org. And a note that of the about a half dozen House members who attended, all were Republicans. PBS reported on Tuesday that the Biden administration is preparing an executive action that would allow the president to temporarily shut down the U.S.-Mexico border using a section of immigration law known as 212F that gives President Biden the power to suspend the entry of migrants temporarily. PBS says that their sources say no decision has been made, but it could come next week after the elections in Mexico. The Biden administration's handling of border security was one of the reasons given by the U.S. House Republican majority for impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas back in February. The Senate in April sustained points of order that the articles of impeachment were unconstitutional, not rising to a high crime or misdemeanor. The Homeland Security Department General Counsel Jonathan Meyer was asked today about this case and the larger subject of impeachment process reform. He was at a program hosted by the American Bar Association in Washington.
We did a calculation. There have been something like over 800 people who have served as members of a president's cabinet in the history of the United States. Until this year, not a single one had an impeachment taken up by the Senate. Now, some of you may think, oh, that's not right. I read something. There was some guy named William Belknap. Yes, Secretary of War William Belknap in 1876 was impeached. But A, by the time he was impeached, he had resigned. And B, even that was not taken up by the Senate. But perhaps most importantly, C, the guy had demonstrably been taking bribes and kickbacks and enriching himself at the expense of the public fisc. None of which is the case with the guy who was impeached this year. And more importantly, there really, throughout the entire process, there was no serious, I would argue, I don't even have to put in the word serious, there was no implication of any personal misconduct. And that's what impeachment's supposed to be about. And it's not really even a point of debate. If you look at the constitutional debates, the framers actually discussed whether, quote unquote, maladministration should be impeachable. And they explicitly said, I think it was James Madison who said, no, if you do that, it will make everyone serving at the pleasure of the Senate, which is not what we have in this republic. We do not have votes of no confidence. So it's funny in the sense of like, I'm laughing because I'm not crying. But it has gone what happened this year took it in the direction of being, look, as you say, yes, it's always been purely political in the sense of, as I think it was, I forget who it was who said that now, one of you probably knows, but someone said, what's impeachable is whatever gains 2/3 of the Senate. Right. Right, it has always depended on votes, but like so much, and you're seeing this more broadly in our political society today, that there were all, and we didn't realize it, for most of my life we didn't realize it, there were all these rules that it turned out were really unwritten rules that are now being ignored because they're not written. And this was one of them, that you don't impeach over a disagreement about policy. And I would argue it's even more than, it is written, as I said, it's in the constitutional history of the United States. But because the rule is whatever gets the votes, it doesn't really, it's not treated as a rule, even though it should be. So I think, yeah, my best description of it is it is, unfortunately, it exemplifies a broader phenomenon we're seeing in this country, which is an abandonment of a lot of a political culture, a lot of unwritten rules that were abided by both sides for centuries. And that is a very, very disturbing development in my mind.
Jonathan Meyer is general counsel at the Homeland Security Department, taking part in an American Bar Association program in Washington, D.C. It was the ABA Standing Committee on Law and National Security. It was held at the University Club. He was asked by an audience member specifically about impeachment. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 411, NASDAQ down 99, S&P down 39. Announcement today that giant pandas are coming back to Washington, D.C., filling the void left by the return of the last 3 pandas from the National Zoo to China in November. In just a minute, we'll speak with Axios reporter Mimi Montgomery about what the pandas mean to Washington, emotionally to the visitors, politically to U.S.-China relations. First, a video posted today by Smithsonian Institution Secretary Lonnie Bunch, First Lady Jill Biden, and Brandy Smith, the National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute director, in which they joke about preparing for two special guests.
Dr. Biden, thank you so much for meeting with us.
Yeah, we're so excited.
But I have to warn you, these guests are particular. And that's why I've asked Brandy Smith to join us. She's an expert and she understands the likes and dislikes of these guests.
Hi, Brandy. Okay, so let's get to it.
Formal dinner or barbecue on the South Lawn?
I don't think you want them on the South Lawn.
What about attire?
Well, they're pretty partial to black and white.
Black tie it is then. What's on the menu?
Any dietary restrictions?
Well, they're strict vegetarians.
Any special greetings they use?
They're pretty shy until you get to know them.
If they're really nervous, they might honk, so that's something you have to watch out for.
Honk?
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm missing something. Who's coming?
Lonnie, we should just tell everyone.
I agree, let's do it.
Okay.
And action.
As Secretary of the Smithsonian, I'm thrilled to announce that within this year, we'll once again welcome a new pair of giant pandas to the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute in Washington, D.C.
For more than 50 years, the zoo's pandas have brought joy to everyone who has seen them and are one of our biggest conservation success stories.
It's especially meaningful to have them at the National Zoo, where people can visit the pandas in person for free or watch them on the Panda Cam with millions of people across the globe.
We can't wait to celebrate this historic moment here in our nation's capital. Join us. It's official. The pandas are coming back to D.C.
With more on the giant pandas returning to Washington, D.C., joining us on the phone is Mimi Montgomery, Axios D.C. reporter. Thanks for being with us. Do we have any more details about when the pandas will be back?
Yeah, no, we don't have any exact details about when the pandas are coming. That's kind of top secret as of right now. But we do know that they will be transported again via the FedEx Panda Express, which has transported 15 bears over the past decades. And was the plane that took the bears back infamously last November. And we do know that they will at least stick around through April 2034. So they're on a 10-year research and breeding agreement with the Chinese government. So we will have them here in D.C. for a long time. So rest assured, everyone will be able to get their panda fix. So the two pandas that are coming, we do know their names and how old they are. So their names are Bao Li and Xing Bao. They're both 2-year-olds. And Bao Li is actually the son of Bao Bao, who was one of the pandas that used to live at the zoo and went back to China several years ago. So it's sort of like a continuation of the line that's already been in the National Zoo. And sort of it'll be a familiar sort of relative for folks to see again.
How big a deal is it having pandas at the National Zoo in Washington?
I mean, I think it's a huge deal, right? Pandas are sort of one of the unofficial mascots of D.C. You know, you see them on all of the zoo swag. People have the stuffed animals, the tote bags. You know, I'm an Axios D.C. reporter. Our mascot is actually a panda. And, you know, when the pandas left last November, it was the first time in, I think, about 2 decades that the city hadn't had a panda. So people were really understandably upset when they left. And it, you know, was a big deal for the zoo, too, because they get a lot of people coming in to see the pandas. So now that pandas are coming back, I think everyone is sleeping a little bit safer and happier at night and just feels much more reassured of that all is right in Washington again.
Giant pandas have been tied up in diplomacy between the U.S. and China since they first came here in the 1970s. What role are they playing now?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, I think it's a sign of good things as far as panda diplomacy, which some folks have taken to calling it. But, you know, today during the press conference, there was a lot of diplomatic goodwill on display. Chinese ambassador was there, and he was, you know, talking about how the pandas were a sign of friendship between the two countries. So I think that, you know, it's a good step forward, a good sign for diplomatic ties to have pandas coming back here to D.C.
Your article mentions that the panda habitat at the National Zoo has gotten a recent facelift.
Yes, so it is getting a multi-million-dollar facelift. The habitat was donated by David Rubenstein, who is a philanthropist here in town, and they'll be getting a whole host of new things. So I think we can expect a new swimming pool, all sorts of new interactive things for the pandas to check out. So I think when they eventually do come back this year, folks can expect them to be in sort of this new and improved environment at the zoo.
Mimi Montgomery, Axios DC reporter. Find her stories at axios.com. Thank you very much.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
And an NBC News article says that the pandas program at the National Zoo and others across the U.S. are part of a breeding and conservation program, and their efforts are working. In the 1980s, there were an estimated 1,100 pandas in China, according to the World Wildlife Fund. Today, there's about 2,000 pandas living in the wild and hundreds more in zoos, moving the species from endangered to vulnerable. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.